Why are furry conventions offering HIV testing to their attendees? I'll give you a hint. It's a good thing. It's not because it's needed, per se, or that furries are sexual degenerates to some extent. I mean, maybe they are depending on who you ask. But the answer is that it's supposed to help promote safe practicing sex. And see, that should be the end of this video, you know. HIV testing at any sort of nerd geek event where people are naturally going to hook up and, you know, have sex with one another, I think is a good thing. That should be the end of it, the end of the discussion. But today I want to talk about this image specifically, how it's brought up out of context, used as sort of a bad gotcha moment against furries, and how having HIV testing at a furry convention is a good thing in the end. However, some people don't see it that way, and that specifically is coming from those in a completely different community that we all know and love, known as the weeb community. But pretty much what happened was someone ended up quote retweeting some point against anime lovers and then made this post with no context and allowed everyone else to make their own assumptions or arguments about it. A lot of very bad, negative assumptions were made about it, but also a lot of good ones were made about, you know, HIV testing being available being a good thing. But I do want to talk about kind of the context to this image in and of itself. Because you're probably wondering, what is this from? Why is there HIV testing at a furry convention to begin with? MFF, or Midwest Fur Fest, has almost always occurred during World AIDS Day, which is a day meant to spread awareness about the threats and stigma associated with HIV and AIDS, and to make it so that eventually HIV is no longer a threat in the world. I believe how this testing actually started at MFF was that this organization known as Howard Brown Health ended up approaching MFF a good few years ago. And so since 2016, I believe, MFF has partnered with Howard Brown Health for HIV and STI testing services. So that's the context for the photo. Why do people have an issue with it, and why is it supposedly a bad thing? Well, the main argument that I see is that furries are supposedly sexual degenerates, which, hate to break it to you, adults like sex. There you go. There's your fun fact of the day. We've seen it time and time again where two communities have clashed, one being furries and one being some other community, whether they be weird for their own reasons, or rather be just as weird as furries. In the case of this week on Twitter, it was a little tiff between the furries and the weebs. How did this start? Some furry posted a comic about how anime lovers or weebs have, you know, some X, Y, or Z negative reason about them. Some stereotype that may or may not prove true, but is negative nonetheless to anyone, you know, associated with it. We've seen it time and time again with furries specifically, where people tie, you know, furry fandom to zoophilia. You know, I'm sure you can insert whatever reason for the anime community, but I don't want to sit here and make those arguments back and forth. And ultimately, when it comes to how Twitter and social media is, it doesn't really invoke the opportunity to have that civil discussion or argument. It is just people slinging insults back and forth at one another, which is kind of counterintuitive to the point. I just want to say, outside of this, you know, failed gotcha moment attempt, I gotta admit, the banner itself is kind of funny. Like, you know, having this cute little raccoon character doing the whole FURSONA crossed arms pose with like a little smirk on his face, and then HIV testing above it. Like, it kind of looks like a meme to some extent. You gotta admit, there's a little bit of humor behind it. It's left up to the audiences to decide what the good or bad is with it. And luckily, it seems like in this case, if you look through a lot of the replies and quote retweets, which I wouldn't recommend because that's just doom scrolling and you'll probably end up having a bad day like I have from reading it. A lot of the arguments, which I am more so for, are that, hey, you know, having HIV testing or any sort of STI testing to promote safe sexual practice, I think is good. As someone who's been to many furry conventions, I know without a doubt that people hook up there. There are furries that hook up, that have sex, that do things behind closed doors, and that's it. I don't know how it goes for making sure, you know, both parties, both consenting adults are knowledgeable about, you know, if anyone has a sexually transmitted disease or not. Sometimes it's a dude trust me moment of like, yeah, I'm good. Sometimes people will send, you know, the most recent tests that they have and all the things that come back negative, and that works too. But a lot of times whenever I have hooked up with someone, I'll just go after a furry convention to whatever doctor's appointment that I have that's in the near immediate future, get tested, you know, do a blood test and all that, and make sure it's all good. That in and of itself is practicing safe sex. Having something like this available during a con if anything, is just more convenient. However, this image has been used negatively towards furries. It's been used to target them, saying that, oh, furries are sexual deviants. Of course they need HIV testing at a convention where, you know, they're just spreading it with one another. When a lot of these arguments come down to hearsay, or this assumption that this is needed, that, you know, MFF, the convention, needed to implement this because, you know, this was a rampant issue. And it's not even that this is a rampant issue. I'd say, if anything, this is a good step for promoting more safe sex within the community, especially a predominantly queer community like furry. That's why I say, you know, this testing and having it available at conventions or events shouldn't just be for furries, it should be for many communities, many events. Unfortunately, in the case of social media, you know, all thought kind of goes out the window, and here we have, you know, this argument between two communities trying to one-up one another on who is worse or who is better. If you saw that post out of context about the HIV testing at MFF, and so when you tie the terms of sexual nature to furry, most people, their brains turn off and they just think, oh, this is a bad thing. Does that mean that it is necessarily a bad thing? No. And that's why, in the case of furries, all you can really do is properly inform those who don't know about it and continue to practice, you know, safe, healthy sex and all that. So ultimately, the HIV testing at MFF was started as a good initiative. It's partnered with an actual organization that wants to offer it for free. It costs nothing out of pocket for MFF as far as I know. And in the end, it's supposed to help promote healthy and safe sex. The one thing I'll say is, if you're looking to mitigate any of the negative reactions to images like the HIV testing being available, doing the same thing that another community is doing to you is not going to solve the problem. If anything, it just creates more bickering and more noise and detracts from actual issues that can be discussed. Not that you're going to actually have a respectable argument on Twitter, that's just not happening, period. It promotes sex positivity and gives proper resources to those who worry about stuff like this. How is that a bad thing? How? If you look at it just from the lens of like the positive perspective and positive approach of just HIV testing in general, it's not a bad thing. The one point that I want to emphasize with this video specifically is that there is a big difference between furry being a sex-positive space and it being sexualized. They are two different things entirely, and there's proper research and measures that can be done into learning about this more and more, which I will be leaving links to articles and whatnot in the description below if you want to learn more about this stuff. One of my friends, Soa Talk, actually put together an amazing article pretty much discussing what I am talking about here, and it has hyperlinks to proper resources and websites. I'm going to leave the link to that article or blog post in the description below. Please go and check it out. Even though it reiterates a lot of what I said here, it gives a bit more context with like hyperlinks and resources and links to other articles that can help inform better. At the end of the day, HIV testing or STI testing at furry conventions is non-problematic. I think it's a good implementation that I think a lot of other events can follow outside of furry. Will people look at it as a bad thing? Yeah, but all you can really do is try to inform them as such that it is supposed to be a good thing and is supposed to fight against the stigma with HIV, with quite literally, you know, World AIDS Day. And using this as a gotcha moment against furries is really weird. But regardless, that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about today. So on that note, thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this, be sure to let me know in the comments below. If you have any discussions or arguments about this, please be sure to leave them respectfully. You know, you guys do a good job at that, so I don't really need to say that, but I just do regardless. But either way, that's about going to do it for me. Have a wonderful night, take care, life stay jacket, treat people like people, and yeah,